All right, gang. You see my notice, probably. I think we ought to push the exam back to Thursday the 27th. I know that that means that 2 and Vincent get to take 2 exams in a row, but y'all are tough. You can do it. And if you can't, really, if you don't want to, then you can take it at the library at your leisure. All right, so more about blocks and scope. The scope of the variable is the block in which it is defined. And this will be a good time to talk about namespace, or namespace again if we already have. The scope of the variable is the block in which it is defined from that point to the end of the block. So it's within the pair of braces. Just like in Python, right? It's in that indentation level. You usually define your variables at the beginning of the function, or so they say. But you can declare them on the fly, right? You know, 2 ideas, right? You could declare your function, right? Or up at the top of your code, if you need X, and you need Y, and you need Z. You know, you define all your variables up at the very top of it, and then whenever you need them, they're there. But if you need another one, you know, there's nothing wrong with creating it, right, on the fly, right? You know, X is equal to Y times whatever. Yeah. You can create them on the fly. If you think it makes your code easier to read, go ahead and move them all up to the top. Something that you may try to do is to keep them inside the block in which they need to be. What do I mean? I mean, if you have something like this, if A is equal to 1, 3, 4, and then you need to perform some super calculation here, you know, and total is equal to A times whatever, right? Well, why declare your total up here? If that variable is only going to be used inside this block meaning from there to there, then you may as well just define it there. On the other hand, if it's going to be used outside of the block, like if it's going to be used here, you know, you're going to see out the total, you gotta declare it up above, like that. You gotta do that. But if it's only going to be used in here, like that, then sure, just declare it inside that loop. That's my opinion. That's my opinion. Declare the variable as closest to where it's needed as possible, but at the top of that block. If I'm trying to do good coding, I'll do that. This is the only place that I need it, or within this block is the only place I need that, then I'll declare it up at the top of that block. If it needs to be used outside of that block as well, then yeah, it better be defined above that block rather than inside it. And if that's the case, then this line of code, you know, or as Z is equal to total, that would be an error. It would not compile because Z no longer exists at that point. The scope of Z is from there to there. Yes, sir.
Does everything, I've been wondering, does everything in a C++ program go in the int main function?
No, no.
Okay.
Very good question. Very, very good question. Incredibly good question, because that's where I was going to go next. So I'm glad you asked that.
Because yeah, you could, I mean, is it global?
Yes, there are global variables in this language, unlike some other ones. So, if, for example, say we write another function, void print, and what it's supposed to do is it's supposed to print my name. And this code is supposed to set my name. So, nope, I'm not going to declare it. And then I'm going to call print, right? For this variable to be available within this scope, and within this scope, it has to be declared outside of the scope of both of them, in which case you move it up here. This is a global variable now. Global meaning that it is accessible to all the functions defined in that file, as long as they're below it, right? If I move that declaration down to the bottom, it's not going to do any good. Nothing So a global variable is one that's accessible to any function that's divided below, that's declared below it. In this language, function order is important. If I move this function underneath the main, it will not work. So like if I had this, if I had print down here, because it doesn't know what print means. It hasn't been declared yet. It hasn't been defined yet. Just like a variable has to be defined before you can use it, a function has to be defined before you can use it as well. And then, yuck, you mean I have to define all my functions in the order that they're going to be called? No, there's something called a prototype. A prototype is the header of the function, but without a body. So I could take that function declaration, I could move it up here, and I just don't provide a body. I end it with a semicolon. That tells the compiler, oh, if you ever see the word print after that, it's going to return a void, which means it doesn't return anything, and it doesn't accept any arguments. So let's say I was going to write a function that added two numbers and returned the value. So add 2, and it takes an int x, and it takes an int y, and it returns x plus y. And so in my code here, I see out the result of add 2, 10 to 20, and it ought to print out 30. And then I decide that I want to push this down to the bottom, or I want to put it in another file. So I cut it and I paste it into another file, or down at the bottom, or something like that. A lot of people like to see main up at the top of their code rather than at the bottom of their code. It makes sense to them. It's the first thing that's going to run. They want to see it up at the top. But it no longer knows what add 2 is. And by the way, for you Java folk, that's not the way Java works. In Java, it does not matter in which order you declare your methods, your functions. It figures it out. It stitches them all together. But the C++ compiler doesn't do that. So the C++ compiler does not know what this function returns. And it does not know how many arguments and what types they are. So we would need to declare a prototype. Well, it returns an int, and it takes 2 ints. So it returns an int. It's called add2. It takes 2 ints. And there we go. We have declared a prototype for that function. And now the compiler knows what it needs to in order to hook this code up. Now notice one difference between the header of a function and the prototype. If I just copy this prototype and then I go down here and I paste it near the actual module definition, the function definition. What's the difference between the prototype and the header besides the fact that the prototype has a semicolon after it?
The header actually defines the function.
Yeah. But conceptually, just looking at it, what is the difference between the way these two things are defined besides the semicolon?
They have variable.
Right. This one has variable names, and this one does not. That doesn't mean you can't put variable names in it. Now you'll see a million examples of code where they leave out the variable names. And in the case of something named add2, it's probably clear what it's supposed to be doing. But what if the variable type looks like this? Or, it's called long, calculate, and it's got a float, and it's got an int, and it's got a string. I don't know what in the world those are, right? I have no clue. I would have to scroll down, find that function, and then look at it in order to determine what those variables are. But then if I see, float, weight, int, age, and then string name, now I have a lot of useful information about it. I think that you ought to put the variable names inside the prototype, but they're not necessary. But I think they provide useful information. I think they make the code clearer, and writing, clear code is awfully important. So now that I've done that, I'm going to put a comment to the effect of, or you can leave off the variable names in the prototype like this. Right, just leave them off. Because the compiler doesn't care at this point what the parameters are called. It just needs to know that it accepts 2 ints. And that tells it that. we're going to play with global variables and we're going to play with, you know, writing multiple functions, and we're going to play with namespaces, which we are going to play with, then we may as well go ahead and create a project. So by my recollection, this is lecture J. Go get my boilerplate because I'm lazy. I've lost my Solution Explorer, so view Solution Explorer. Come to my source files, right click, and I know y'all know this. Add new item, give it a good name. Heck, lecture J sounds good to me. Lecture J.cpp. Paste my boilerplate in there. Angel, when she's using her Mac, and you, I bet as well, I bet it actually creates some boilerplate when you create the file, does it not?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a little different than ours. But
Yeah, I like that. Okay. So, I'm going to make two functions that rely on a global variable. And by the way, using global variables is kind of frowned upon. So, I'm going to give this example and know that they are there, and then also know that the ghost of programmers past are all sitting there frowning at you when you use them. But they may be applicable. So, I'm going to declare a variable called string name, and I'm going to have a function called setName, which accepts a string as a parameter, and it sets name equal to that, so name is equal to n. And then I'm going to have another function called printName. So void printName. It doesn't need an argument. So I'm not going to define a parameter. And all it does is see out the name is space end quote, arrow, arrow, name, arrow, arrow, ENDL, semicolon. Why did I declare name as a global variable? Because it needs to be accessible to both functions, the way I've written it. Right. There's probably another solution I could come up with that wouldn't need that. But the way I've written it, it has to be a global variable. Now, my own personal naming convention is that if it's a global variable, I put G underscore or underscore G to indicate that it's a global variable. You absolutely don't have to do this, but you could do G underscore name or name underscore G if you felt like it. To my mind, it indicates that it's a global variable, so if I'm going and I'm looking at pages upon pages of code and I see one with a G underscore in front of it, then I know that it was a global variable and rather than one that was declared locally. A local variable is one that's defined within a block of code. Alright, so I'm going to label this a global variable. Then I'm going to scroll down to main and I'm going to call setName and then I'm going to call printName. Just to make the code a little bit more concise on screen, I'm going to follow that other style of brace placement. Move that brace there, move that brace there, delete the blank lines, move that brace there, and then I'm going to call setName, and I'm going to call it Bob, that's the name I'm setting, and I'm going to call printName. And I'm not passing any data to it because that name has already been stored.
Why did he get like that?
Okay, so what is a namespace? A namespace is a way of cordoning off data and functions. And I'll show you what I mean. I could put all of these things in a namespace. The first thing to do is just highlight that global variable and the functions that use it. Highlight that all, but not main. Don't highlight main. Just highlight all that and hit tab. And don't hit enter like I just did because that erases everything. And then do this. Namespace. And I need to come up with a good namespace for this. Names. Open brace. It also puts a close brace right then and there, but delete the close brace. The close brace comes down here above the word main. Now when I want to use that stuff, I can't just use set name. I got to put name : in front of it, or names : in front of it. And then I got to put names : in front of that one too. That says which namespace it is stored in. All right, now forgive me, but I'm going to change this up just a little bit. Having looked at it, I think I could come up with a better namespace name and better function names. So I'm going to see if I can lose y'all. I'm going to come up here, and instead of namespace names, I'm taking off the S. So that's my first change. The second thing I'm doing is where it says set name, I'm just changing that to set. Like that. And on print, I'm removing that word name there. So I change this line, and this line. And I'm going to have to make the changes to where I call it as well, which is just right down here. So I'm going to nudge this code down one by one. And instead, it's name : set, and then it's name : print. Like that. That's what a namespace is for. If you've done Java programming, this may look like it's kind of using a class member. Like when you create a box, and so you do box.setX and box.setY and box.calcVolume and stuff like that. Looks like it's object-oriented programming. It's really not. It's kind of a precursor to object-oriented programming. So what if you give somebody this code, this namespace, you tell them how to use it, and you tell them to write some code with it, and they get really tired of typing name : in front of everything. That's what that using keyword is for. If you do this, you could put it inside a main or above it. Using namespace name. Then you could get rid of that name : stuff. It assumes it. It does a search. Oh, do I have a set function? No, I don't. I better check my namespace. There may be one up in the name namespace. It does. So that's what that function does. Excuse me. That's what that keyword does. But that namespace stuff is useful information, just like I said about the parameters. I hope I have the recording going for me. Alrighty. I'm going to undo those changes because maybe I'll comment it out. And then it becomes name : set and name : print. Now, why is my gut instinct to not use this namespace name? Because I may have some other function in this code called set, and another function called print, right? Or maybe in a namespace declared in another file, I have a print. And if I just go and willy-nilly start adding using namespace, then I'll have name conflicts, right? Because if I declared another namespace that had the same function name, I'm going to show this, and then I'm going to undo it, so I don't necessarily want you to type it along with me. I'm just going to create a namespace called dummy, and inside it I'm going to create a function called set. maybe it even accepts a string. And so down in here, I'm going to do using namespace name and then using namespace dummy. And then I'm going to just call set, hoping that it knows which one I want it to call. Well, I wanted it to use the one in the names namespace, right? I didn't want it to use this dummy one. It doesn't know which one I mean, though. Because I'm bringing both of them in, it doesn't know how to pick between the two. So it says more than one instance of overloaded function set. Well, we don't know what overloaded means, but anyways. So that's an argument against the keyword using. Because when you bring in multiple namespaces like that, you could have name collisions. We have this function named here, and it matches this one. So the compiler doesn't know which one to use. Now, yeah, if we comment this one out, then magically that fixes it because there's no more collision. If we comment this one out too, that makes it even better, right? Now I'm going to go and delete that dummy stuff. That's what namespace does. And I'll probably come back and hit the topic again and then hit it a third time as we get closer to defining classes. Because like I said, it's kind of a precursor to writing classes. If I come in, now that we kind of understand what using namespace std means, if I take that out, suddenly it lights up with errors. The reason why is because all of this stuff was defined as part of the std namespace. And if I wanted to fix it, I would have to do std : there. I would have to put std : there. I would have to do that everywhere that appeared. std : there. std : there. Am I finally done? Looks like I'm done. Now, just like I said, using variables is considered poor taste. This is also considered poor taste, using namespace std, because a lot of people may declare a namespace called std, and you may get function name or variable name collisions if you do that, just like we did with our namespace and our dummy namespace. So really I ought to be not showing y'all using namespace std, but when we're typing in code, it sure is easier if we don't have to type std : in front of everything. So it's kind of like in the real world, don't do it, but in here to make it easier to type, go ahead, feel free.
What does it replace? Like, it doesn't do all keywords, or like, because it does string, but it doesn't. You don't have to put it in front of int.
Right, because ints are not declared in that namespace. Just like the only things that are declared in my name namespace, I only have three things. I have a variable, any function, and another function. So I didn't have to come down here and do name : system because it's not part of that namespace. Similarly, it's also not part of that namespace. So there are some things that are and some things that aren't. And the things that are the things that are inside these libraries that they've decided that everybody ought to be able to access. And so the string class has something called an std, in an std namespace, and also iostream does. And that's why we had to put std in front of that one. And we also had to do it in front of our cout and our endl. That kind of makes sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, variables, you can define them close to the first use. You can define, usually, the author says, defined at the beginning of the function. Variables with the same name. Are variables allowed with the same name? Well, let's figure this out. What if we have a function called dummy here, and I have a variable in main called x, int x, and I have a variable called int x here? That's not an error. That's totally cool. And why is that okay? Because they're within completely different blocks, right? There's no way this could conflict with this, because they're defined within different sets of parentheses, different braces. What if you have this? What if now we have a while loop of some kind, and we declare another variable called x? Is that legal? Well, in some languages it is, some languages it isn't. In this particular language it is legal. then what is it? What in the world does it mean? If I set x equal to 100, and then I come down here and I see out x, then let's say that I had set x equal to 0 here. Oh, see, I'm getting all this error about cout because I commented out the using namespace. I'm going to go and uncomment out the using namespace so I don't have to type std in front of everything because I'm lazy. All right. Uncomment out using namespace. Come back down here. All right, so I have this function. It declares a variable called x. It sets it equal to 0. What if it was even a different type? Like it was a float. That's even worse. So we set this floating point variable equal to 100, and then after the brace, we print x out. What is it going to print? Is it going to print 0 or 100.00? You are correct, 0. And the reason why is because this is valid only within those braces. It's kind of like this stuff wasn't even there as far as this statement is concerned. What if we didn't have this line of code here? Is that a syntax error? And it sure is. Why is that? Why is X underlined?
It's not declared.
Right, it's not declared. It's declared within this brace, but the scope of this variable, the range in which it's valid, is only within the braces in which it's defined. There's really no way to change the value of that variable in here. Right? If this was a string, there's no way to change Bob to something else inside here. That's called data hiding or masking. I think the textbook will give us a cute word for it right away. By declaring this one, we've hidden this one. We can't change it anymore until we're out here, right? Because from this point on, anytime we use X, it thinks it's referring to the closest one. Now, you would wonder why you can't just turn around and do this then, right? If I'm allowed to create a variable here that hides this one, then why am I not allowed to create a variable here that hides this one? And it's actually starting to look like it's going to work. Is that true, or is it going to give me an error? All right, there were build errors. That's true. It's funny that it doesn't highlight it. I'm getting scared. Why, that's an error. Maybe it's just because this is here in front of it. Yep, that was it. It's funny how the error messages don't always match up with what you would expect, right? So I declare that int x. I think that I'm good. I forgot that I'd already had an x defined, pages up in the code. Then I build it. I get an error. I have to come and look at my error list. I double click on it, and it says illegal for class. You could stare at this all day long and not figure out why that was illegal for class. Then the next error does give us a clue. Redefinition. Okay, that variable was being redefined. It was being defined previously. Other editors will do it differently. On your Mac users, maybe it'll put your red mark out here and actually accurately give you what's wrong. It's just that the people who write the editors, have to figure out how they're going to display, the errors. But this is bad because if X has been defined here, we can't define it again in the same block at the same level. You can define it inside another block, but you can't define it at the same level. Now, Python, you didn't have to define things. And it was totally okay to do that and then later on store some kind of completely different data in it. But in this language, you have to give every variable a type, and once it is declared, you cannot change its type in that same block indentation level. So, variables that are defined within braces have local or block scope. When you're inside a block, within another block, when you have nested code, you can define variables with the same name as one in the outer block. And I just demonstrated that with X. When you're in the inner block, the outer definition is not available. Not a good idea. Why? Because it's just a bad idea. You don't really know which variable you're changing. if the code is more than a fit on one page, and you see that X, and you think that you're changing something that was declared at the beginning of the function, no, you may be changing something that was declared, only in the beginning of that while loop. But if that while loop is 50 lines of code long, you may not spot that immediately. Same problem with global variables, right? If you see a global variable and it's called temperature, well, later on in the code, if you see temperature being set, this is totally legal stuff. If we have a global variable called temperature right here, I could also define one here. Even give it a different type if I feel like it. If I make any changes inside this code to temperature, why are you underlining there?
Do you have except that it's in the string?
Oh, perpeter, thanks. Okay, yeah. All right, so we have hidden this global variable by this definition. That's why I like sticking underscore G there, or G underscore, one or the other, to indicate that it's a global variable, and that way it drastically reduces the chance of confusion about what scope, what level your variable is declared in. About enough of that. All right. End of the chapter. Any questions about what we've done?
So what's the test over? How many chapters?
Good question. What's the test over? Is it over chapter 5 as well? Did I say it was going to be over 5? When did I set the due date of it? Let's go eyeball it. Those very important
You
questions.
sent an email saying it was gonna be the 27th.
27. Do y'all get the email when I post a notice?
No.
Is that a yep or a no? Okay. I wish it did. It seemed that at one time it was doing that, and then it stopped doing that, and that depresses me. So anyways, if it's going to be the 27th, I can't put anything on it that's from another chapter, right? I'm not going to throw in chapter 5. So let's see what my PowerPoint says if I have them divided by unit, which I do not. So if I make PowerPoints unit 1, then I could drag those into it, and those would be the ones that we're going to cover in this exam. And then I'll bring up the exam and we'll do a review. The best review is to do the quiz. That would make this one PowerPoint Unit 2. I don't think we're going to do 3 units this time. Okay. Now, I'm not going to let you all see the exam. So just a second. And I could turn the screen off and just write on the board, but Vincent's not here. He'd appreciate it if whatever I write, I actually type. Do the chapter 4 quiz as soon as possible, like by Saturday, so that they can be graded and you have plenty of time to retake it and stuff like that. All right. Know what the various data types are and how to declare them, right? If I have float f, and then I have int I, and I have char c, and I have string s, and then I have some data, like Bob even if I use the same piece of data, just represented 4 different ways like that. Which of these guys, let's label them with letters. Don't do that. A, B, C, and D. Which one is a float? A, B, C, or D?
B.
Yeah, which one's an I?
C.
Yeah, these are pretty easy. Which one's a character?
B.
Yep, and which one's a string? A, yeah. Did I accidentally do them just in reverse order? Yeah, sure did, whatever. All right, know your PIM dash, your order of operations. P, and this language doesn't have exponents, so I'm gonna leave off the E. MDAS, which means that parentheses have the highest order, and then multiplication and division and modulus have the next, and then addition and subtraction have the third precedence. So if you have this, 1 plus 2 times 3, what does that evaluate to?
Sept.
Right. What is not equal to? It's not equal to 9. You don't do 1 plus 2, well that's 3, times 3 equals 9. You just have to do this first. And the fact that this is saying that you do addition and subtraction here doesn't mean that you have to do all the additions before you do all the subtractions. Right, if we have this, these are all just in the same tier. I don't go, whoops, A comes first, I better do this part first. In the same tier, you just solve the expression left to right. So it'd be 5 minus 1, which is 4, plus, well, we should have done that one first before we did anything, which is 6. So 5 minus 1 plus 6 is 10.
Is there any time where it doesn't behave by the rules of mathematics?
I don't think you can create an expression that doesn't follow these rules. If you look at C++ operator precedence, you'll get a huge table because all the operators have some precedence. And so, for example, namespace, or what they're calling scope resolution, has a higher precedence than anything else. Here's addition and subtraction. That means multiplication and division are going to be higher. But then there's other things. There's star A's and plus plus A and A plus plus and stuff like that. So, no, it's never going to not follow these rules, but there are a lot of rules. Usually, you can avoid any confusion just by, grouping things with parentheses or whatever. And quite often, they just seem to make sense. We've talked about A plus plus and plus plus A. But if I did this, x is equal to plus plus A times 2, you might be able to figure out which one of these is going to happen first. But you might guess wrong. Does that happen before it gets multiplied by 2? The answer is yeah. If the plus plus comes before the A, it's the first thing that happens in the expression. But if you do this, x is equal to A plus plus times 2. And worse is if you take all that off, right? That makes it look really horrible. But anyways, if you have that, if the plus plus follows the variable, it's the last thing that happens. So if A was equal to 10 here, and then we did plus plus A times 2, well, plus plus happens at the beginning, so what does A become before it's multiplied by 2? It's 10,
11.
becomes 11, and we multiply by 2, and so the answer to that is 22. Here, and what is A? Okay, so x is equal to 22, and then A is equal to what when this is done? 11, okay. But what if we do it this way? The plus plus following the variable means it's the very last thing that happens in the expression. So A is 10, it doesn't change yet. And 10 times 2 is 20, so that gets stored in x. And then, by the time we're done, by the time it hits the semicolon, that's when A gets incremented. So it may seem weird to you that by putting the order by changing the order of that, by putting it there instead of there, then that changes its behavior, but that's as defined in the operator precedence table. In this particular case, just remember that if plus plus or minus minus precedes a variable, it's the first thing that happens. If it follows a variable, it's the last thing that happens. And so what gets copied across the equal sign will differ. Now, if you were the programmer involved in this, oh, I should reset it equal to 10 or else my example doesn't make sense. If I was the programmer and I didn't want you to get confused about it, I could write this one like this. A is equal to 10, A plus plus, and then X is equal to A times 2. That does the same thing as this, right? It's a lot clearer though. A is equal to 10, great. Oh, now it's equal to 11. Now we're multiplying it by 2. So by the time we printed out A and X, you would know what it was. So, but what if we try to do that one? Well, we define A is equal to 10, and then we do X is equal to A times 2, and then we do A plus plus. That gives you the story, right? What did X wind up being in this one? Well, it was 10, it became 11, and then we multiplied it by 2, so X is 22. What does X become in this one?
20.
20, right. So, this is the equivalent of this. This is the equivalent of this. By expanding it, by writing it in multiple lines, it became clearer so that someone who was not initiated well into order of operation in the precedence wouldn't have to guess. I'm always fond of doing that, just like I'm fond of using parentheses to group things, even if it seems even if it's strictly unnecessary. If I have this, X is equal to 10 plus 80 divided by 2 plus 5. I know, I'm a programmer, I know what order it's going to solve it in, the computer knows. But if I write it like that, then somebody else who I'm sharing the code with also knows. Does the same thing, right? But by adding parentheses, I provided clarity to the expression. All right, good old modulus. Say we have x is equal to 7 and y is equal to x mod 3. What is y? We have talked about modulus, I hope. Somebody shake their head no if we haven't.
Yeah.
Yeah, be 1.
Yeah, 3 goes into 7 how many times?
2.
Twice, with a remainder of 1. So, y equals 1. What if we did this? X is equal to 10, x minus minus, and then y is equal to x mod 3. What is y going to equal?
0.
Going to equal 0. Why? Because what does x equal by the time it gets here?
9.
9. And then 3 goes into 9 3 times with no remainder. So at that point, y equals 0. POW, you know what the POW function does. If I do x is equal to POW 5, comma 2, what is that?
Square 5.
Yeah, it squares it. So at that point, x is equal to 25. We're good on that. And if it was 3, it would be 5 times 5 times 5. Getting a little bit more esoteric. If that was 0, what would it be?
1.
Exactly. Yeah, just like we've talked about, anything to the power of 0 is 1. And there's a mathematical proof.
Do you have to put that down as in, because it looks like an ordered pair. Is there another way to write that? I'm just curious.
Well, it's not an ordered pair, it's just 2 arguments to a function, if that makes sense. Now in the language Python, you can do things like this. A is equal to 5, comma 2, and you have created what's known as a tuple, right? It's a pair of numbers. So anytime you're going to do something, that they get, they follow each other around. So if you printed out A, it would print 5, comma 2. I don't know if I answered your question.
Can you do that in C++?
Nope. Nope.
Is there a way, so you just have to do it separately, A equals?
You would have to bring in a class that supports tuples, and I'm sure that there is one. C++ tuple class. The tuple class. There's also a pair class. import angle brace tuple, and then you can use it, and then you can do stuff like that with it. But it's not built into the language. It's a class you have to bring in. It's part of the standard library that ships with it. Python adds a lot of things that come standard with Python are not built into C++, but are included in the libraries that ship with it.
Why do they do that? Why is it just all, and is it just?
Because
safe space?
C was invented in 1970, and then it just grew and grew and grew, but they grew it by adding libraries rather than modifying the language. And then when C++ came, they kind of stuck to that. They added a whole bunch of object-oriented stuff, but they kept the idea that this is your basic language, and these are your libraries. And Python does the same thing. There's a lot of stuff that's in the math library that's not built in. Like if you want a square root function, there's no square root function that's built into Python, so you just do import math, and then you can use the square root function.
Is that
So,
what, oh, sorry.
pardon?
Is that what keeps like old programs from just crashing? if they were updating?
Yeah, but it also makes the language smaller. Smaller meaning that, why would being smaller be an advantage? I don't know.
You can do what it is you need to do, or you can make your own classes.
Yeah, you could write your own classes. It makes the things that you need to learn in order to understand the language a smaller subset of stuff. And then as you learn more about it, then you go and you learn about the associated libraries. Because there'd be a lot of stuff that would be absolutely silly, like the turtle class inside of Python, which draws a picture on the screen and you send a turtle all over the place. That would be silly to include in the main language itself, because 99.999% of the people in the world don't need a turtle class. So they move that stuff off into they move that off into a library.
I didn't take Python, so
Pardon me?
I didn't take that, so I don't know what
Yeah,
you're talking about.
I'm going to show it to you in here. Here's what a turtle looks like, just for fun, because I wish there was a turtle. You're not going to run from me? There we go. Okay, this is just for fun. Difference between this language and that, and I'm very sorry that the font is so dang small. Dadgummit, and this is supposed to be a fast example. Alright. Okay, so you have to import the turtle, and then you do t is equal to turtle dot capital turtle to create your turtle, and then you can send the turtle forward 100 pixels, and then you can turn him right and make him turn to right 90 degrees, and then you can send him forward another 100 pixels. So here we go. There, right, so it draws. And it's remarkably cool that you can get something that draws something that quickly. To do the same thing in C++, there may be a turtle library that you could download and install. But otherwise, popping up a window and drawing 2 lines on it like that is going to take a lot more code in C++ than it does in Python. That's just one reason why a lot of people use Python, is because it's simpler to write code, a lot of code in it. Not simpler to write everything, but it's simpler to write a lot of code. But then again, it's silly to have something cluttering up your language that 99.99% of the people would never use. And so if you had a textbook for Python that described the language, you'd rather have one that was 50 pages long rather than 500 pages long, because it included all the libraries for all the graphical stuff and things like that. Similarly with C++, there are libraries that'll let you create windows and move buttons and place buttons on the screen and create graphical user interfaces, but it's not part of the core language, because those things differ on a platform by platform basis. The way you create windows on a Mac is completely different than the way that you do it, on Windows or on Unix. So all of that stuff is pushed into libraries that are specific to those platforms. It's not part of the core language. Now, it would seem like things with tuple and things that are so fundamental, yeah, they ought to be in the language. They ought to come up with a new version of C++, and they're always they're always improving, they're always adding on to the C++ spec. Like every 5 years they publish a new version, but it's not going to have all the libraries in it. Did I answer the question? Close enough anyways. All right. Take my Python class. You'll like it. All right, know the difference between things like that, that, braces yet, so I'm not going to show those. Okay, so which of these does some math that adds, like an increment operator, adds 1 to a value? It's obvious, right? Which one of these is a comment?
Top one.
Right. Which one of these is a math operator that does modulus? You know that one. Which one of these groups a chunk of code together into a block?
Really.
Bottom one.
Yep. And this one actually does 2 things. Which one groups parameters together in a function call, or changes the order in which things are done in a math expression?
Parentheses.
That one. Yeah. So if I have some code like this, which one of these might be a keyword? Fortunately, they're color-coded to make it really easy. Is int a keyword? Is while a keyword? Is true a keyword? Is float a keyword? And the answer is yeah. This editor highlights all of the keywords as blue. The keywords are the fundamental core language. They're the verbs and nouns that specify the language. All right, so which of these are identifiers? Identifiers are not keywords. They're things that you get to pick. They're colored differently.
Red.
X is an identifier, and so is dummy. Which of these are operators? Well, we really only see one operator here. People don't usually think of the equal sign as an operator, but it is. But if we scroll down here, well, I guess I didn't do any math. But if we had some, whatever, x is equal to 100 times 2, right? We know where the operator is, right? It's that one. What begins a preprocessor directive? Well, if I'm scrolling up or down, where are my preprocessor directives? These are the preprocessor directives, so what symbol starts them off? Hash, pound. Yep. Now some of these are just little chunks of code that I want you to write. Declare a string called last name. And then print a message saying please enter last name. And then let the user type it in. Okay, so that ought to be 3 lines of code, and you've done it enough to know how to declare a string, to display a message with cout, and to read something in with CIN. If I ask you to write some code like that, don't go nuts and add some # includes and define a main method and, no, just write the 3 lines, the cout, the CIN. And so I will say things like, don't write a whole program, don't put a main include, or using just 3 or 4 lines of code will do it. A lot of people, some people, don't want to just write the code in the browser. They want to actually write it in the programming editor, copy and paste it. Don't do that. Don't stress so much about it, right? That wastes your time. If you know how to do CIN and cout and stuff like that, I'm not going to blow your grade away just because you forgot a semicolon. Or if while you were typing it into the browser, you put a colon at the end rather than a semicolon or left it out. You may be counted off some like that, but it's not going to. I'm looking to make sure you understand the structure of it. I think I had some questions in the quizzes about, like, if you're going to use the random class, what library you have to bring in. But then again, I'm getting this confused with my scripting class. Just know what these libraries do. What does CMath do? Math. Functions like POW are supposed to be stored in CMath, but Microsoft brings them into the main. How about SetW and set precision? We really didn't even use those, but those are I/O manipulators. Just look them up in your book if you don't have them. Some of them are a little bit, where would you find the string class? What do you # include for the string class? String, yeah. How about cout and CIN and yeah, that's IO string. And then the one that got a lot of people is rand and srand or whatever, the random number functions. I think lot of people said C time or something like that. You don't have to include C time, or whatever library includes that. You do if you want to use C time, but these aren't C time functions, they're random functions. So they're in a different library. They are, as a matter of fact, in C std lib. Feel free to write that down in your notes because I may delete some of these from, well, I guess I didn't put which one is which. Make sure you know which functions go with which things, right? So ABS, absolute value, you know which function you would find them in. Set W, set width and set precision. I am going to leave that one there, just because, like I said, I'm pretty sure I skipped that. I know some of y'all people have used it, like too, so good work. This code, I need to remove this question because it's about that, set precision. I'm not giving you the answer to every single question.
You don't mind.
I know you don't mind. Is C++ a case-sensitive language? If I do this, int x, and then I do int y, and then I do, string C, and then later on I do capital C is equal to Bob. Is that going to work? No. I would have to do that. What else would I have to change?
Capital C.
Yeah, so C is a type sensitive. C++ is a case sensitive, excuse me. If you have this line of code, x, whoopsie, excuse me, int b, b is equal to a times 3. Which one of these is a keyword?
Int,
Which one of these is an operator? There's actually more than one.
equal, and so on.
Yeah, equal and then multiply. And which ones are operands? What are operands? Operands are the pieces of data that the operator works on.
Negative.
So in this case, it's A and 3. So the operator is that, and then the operands are A and 3. Now, you would think that that makes B an operand, and I guess technically it is. But this is a matching question, so you can't really get it wrong by saying that I really wish that that I could pick B for both. I tried it. All right, if you have an expression like this, let me show everybody. Yeah, I guess showing the light on it doesn't actually help. All right, if you were going to create an expression that matches this, would you do A equals 2x? Would you type that into your program, or would you do something between the 2 and the x?
2 star, right?
You put a star, right? And then would it be a good idea to use parentheses on the bottom?
Yes.
Yeah. Hey, neat. I scrolled too much and lost the entire page. You know, I love my Apple junk, but if you've ever used a browser a lot, you get real tired of the message, an error has occurred and page has been reloaded. I don't know if any of y'all ever see that, but I do.
You're using Safari?
Yep. That's probably my mistake.
Yeah, there you go.
right, there are 4-byte data types and there are 8-byte data types. If you have int and long, which one of them is 4? Int. Actually, long is as well, sorry. But long. Which one is long? 8, right. On Windows, longs and ints are the same size. Everybody else in the world, every other platform says that long is a 8-byte data type. How about floats and doubles? Which one is larger? Which one?
Double.
Yeah, doubles are larger than floats. So they're the 8-byte data types.
Can you type in a notepad how you would have done that division you said for a second ago?
Okay,
Just to make
my brain is already reset.
the numbers don't matter. You had like a X over.
Oh, okay, I had some expression, and it had something on the top and it had something on the bottom.
Yeah.
I would do something like this. Whatever, right? I would group the top stuff with parentheses, and I would group the bottom stuff with parentheses. Now, I'm sure that's not the exact expression, but that's the idea. And in this particular case, would I have to have the stuff in the parentheses? No. Strictly speaking, I'd only need to cluster this stuff in the parentheses to make sure that that plus happened before the rest of it. But I don't mind doing both parts, right? Nothing wrong with it. I'm not going to count you wrong if you left that out or if you put it in.
You didn't have a 2X. Does it count it wrong? Or?
That would be wrong,
Okay.
because the C compiler doesn't recognize that as being multiplication. Sure, textbooks do, but C doesn't. And in fact, I haven't seen a programming language that does. And I'm not sure why.
Does that mean?
Okay, I do know a good reason why. What if you had this expression, A is equal to B, B2, something like that. It wouldn't know whether you meant a B times 2 or you had a variable name called B2. Casting. I think everybody knows how to cast, but write a line of code that takes variable B and casts it as a double to store in D. There's 3 ways of doing it. Somebody give me one of them. D, in each case, D goes on the left-hand side because we're storing it in D. And then what?
Double parentheses.
Yep.
B.
Double parentheses B. That's the Python style. Should I stop talking about Python? Wave your hand if you've taken a Python course.
I'm taking it right now.
All right, okay, so some of y'all have taken it, so otherwise I should just shut up. I know that some of y'all are also taking Java, so that's why I mentioned Java occasionally. Specifically, regarding Java, you have these 2 words. They mean the same thing, but one of them is C, C++, and one of them is Java. And so which one of these do you use in C++? You use const, and use final in Java. And I'm sorry that they didn't use the same word in both of them when they mean the same thing. All right. I really hope I don't ask you C++ guys if final is a correct word, because that would be mean now that I just typed it up there. I'll look at the test and make sure I didn't. Anyways, that's one way to do it. What's another way? Put the parentheses like that. And then there's the third way, which looks weird, and it's the way the book tells you to do it. Static underscore cast, double, B. So, this is C style, this is old C++ style, this is newer C++ style. And you go, man, that looks horrible. Yeah, it does, but it provides some more flexibility because you can define different types that go there, and you can use the same, same syntax to convert it to different types based on that. Whatever. You don't have to do all 3 of them. I just ask you to do one and you can pick. When do you use getLine? Do you use getLine every single time you need to read input into a string, or do you use it when there are spaces in the input? Yeah, you don't need to use getLine unless there are spaces in it. The reason you use getLine if there are spaces is because what if you did this? Name is CIN error name. and then later on you say address, those CIN arrow address. That's what your program is. And in your code, somebody comes in, they type in Bob Roberts. After Prince, what is your name? So it says name, and what do I type in? I type in Bob Roberts. What winds up being stored in name? Right. It tokenizes it. It reads up to the first bit of white space, and the white space is everything that spaces or tabs or the carriage returns. So it stores Bob in the name, and it stores Roberts into address. If I wanted to fix that, I would use cin.getLine. I believe its name is equal to cin.getLine. Don't quote me on that. Yeah, it has to be. Right? Why don't I remember? Oh, well, what do you know? I had the syntax wrong. You feed the variable in that you want to fill in. So you would do that. That would store that into it, and then once you ask, for the address, you would use getLine again. So cin.getLine, and then pass in the address variable. I don't ask you that, but hey, now it's in our notes. You needed to know. There's a question I need to remove. There's another question I need to remove. There's another question. Okay. Apparently I should not have skipped IO manipulators because I have 20 questions over here. We have things like this. Generically, as a group, what are these called? All right, I'm going to look at you two because I know that you just had this in another class as well. What are those called? Escape sequences. These are called escape sequences. Which one goes to the new line?
Flush it.
Which one does a tab? You can take a guess. Which one prints a double quote? You can take a guess. Which one prints a single quote?
One dash.
Right. And there is in some environments a /A, which rings a bell or beeps, called alert. I don't think this language supports it. I'll probably pop up /A as an option to pick, just don't pick it.
Wait, does that actually make a beep?
Yeah, especially back in old days when you didn't even have sound cards in the machines, and all they could do was beep, or you had a terminal, ring a bell.
Oh, these are one of these speakers.
Maybe we can try it out. Let's print out a /. See out arrow, beep, /A, /n. No. On the other hand, maybe I don't have the speakers on or something, right? Yeah, I do. Okay. So, this doesn't work. That's okay. Alrighty, that's about it. Since we're looking at the escape sequences, though, why do we have escape sequences? What if I do this? I create a string, and I want to store something in it, and what I want it to be able to print out is my name is Slim, like that. I'm a big M&M fan. So I want to store something in S so that when I see out S, it will print my name is Slim. Okay, what do I put in here? What do I put in here? My name is Slim. Oh, well, this is starting to look weird. Is that going to be a syntax error, or is it going to work?
It's gonna be a syntax error.
It's a syntax error. Why? Because it thinks that this is the beginning of the string, this is the end of the string, and then it hits this word here, and it has no idea what's going on. So you need some way of telling it, oh, I'm inside a string, but that quote is not a quote. It's not a string marker. It's punctuation. So you do that. And then when it prints, that is an escape character that gets turned into a double quote. Or if you put backslash apostrophe, then it would print out my name is Slim. All right, one more since we're on the idea. What if I wanted to say file name is equal to, and I wanted to print that out, and I wanted to say C:\temp /new.txt, something like that. So I store that in a variable, fn, and we need to stop real soon, don't we? I'm having way too much fun. C:\temp /new.txt, and then I see it out. What is it going to print, really? It's going to print C, it's going to print colon, and then what does \t do?
It's gonna tab it.
It tabs it, and then it prints out MP, and what does \n?
New line.
Is that really what I wanted it to print? No. So there's another escape sequence that means \. So out of our escape sequences, I'm going to tack that one on. That prints out a \. This prints out a apostrophe, a single quote. This prints out a double quote. That prints out a new line, and that prints out a tab.
Wait, how did you stop the slash in again? Oh, you just did two, okay.
Right, if I do two of them, what it does is, oh, that's supposed to just be a \. And when it hits that one, it says, oh, that's just supposed to be a \, and that stops it from treating it like \t and \n. Alrighty. Well, that is the exam. I pretty much went over it question by question. That doesn't mean that I gave you every question, which I didn't. But like I said, there'll be little coding problems, mostly just stuff like, display a message and read some input, or write something that'll read in a number and add 10 to it and print it out, things like that. That should not be hard at this point. If you can do the quizzes, which I strongly recommend you do, then you can probably do the exam.
So
Plus, it's open book.
we don't get to review our quizzes.
Yeah, you should be able to review your quizzes.
I just couldn't figure out how to look at it.
Good question, and I can't show you up here because as a teacher, even if I switch to student mode, I can't create a quiz. I mean, I can't step into a quiz, but what you do is there's a little pull down, and you click on the pull down and then choose submissions. And then once you choose submissions, there's a number with an underline, and you click on that.
I got it, yeah.
Good.
Thanks.
Okay. And if you miss it, if it's multiple choice, I might not give you the right answer, but if it's something that you typed in, I probably gave you a strong hint. If it's a whole bunch of true falses or matching or something like that, I'll tell you missed the first and the last one, something like that, to give you a clue. If it's a true false, I'm not going to tell you, but you can guess. Oh, I should have picked the other thing. And then take it again after you read that. Let's make a Dropbox now.